Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You're tuned into the handmade photograph, history, evolution, and inspiration. That's right. Even though we're streaming and you guys are watching this on YouTube right now, this is the inspiration that you need to get out from behind the computer, get out from behind the camera, get into the tactile, tangible, real world and create something. So I'd like to welcome Eileen Rafferty back to the program. Eileen, great to have you back.
Eric, thanks for having me. Love being here.
We love having you on, and we especially love when you bring us out from behind our computer screens and inspire us to start creating again and print and give us some ideas to really what we can do with our art. So I'm going to let you do what you do best. I'm going to invite all of our viewers to get any of your questions in. You can drop it right in the chat in YouTube. And Eileen, I will see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here as always. Love doing my classes with B&H. And any of you who know me from past classes or teaching, there's a lot of topics that are kind of my favorites, and this would be one of them. Any kind of alternative process, alternative printing, anything handmade. It's not that I don't love Photoshop and computers, of course, but I think that there's a whole world of making photographs outside of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And unfortunately, I can't be in the room with you showing you these techniques hands-on, but we're going to talk about some history, some ideas, and I'm going to give you lots of ideas for what you can do, how you can embrace some of these techniques on your own, from easy ways to a little more challenging ways. So hope you enjoy it. Let's see, let me pull up my screen here. All right, so the handmade photograph, history, evolution, and inspiration is what I'm calling this. And basically what we're going to go through here is early photography, only because even though we think about, well, one, I'm a real history buff when it comes to photography, as a lot of you may know. I think it's a really important and inspiring place to learn. But then also there was some really interesting experiments happening in the beginning that really are the precursors to so many of the alternative processes and handmade techniques we use today. Then we're going to leap into the late 1800s and look into Victorian photocollage, which is just so fun and exciting. Then we're going to jump to some of the UV, the ultraviolet processes, cyanotypes, chemigrams, and lumens. And then one of my favorite topics and one of my favorite ways to work, alternative printing and services. So I always begin with some resources. I'm also a bookworm, and I use a lot of books for my research. So this is just a few. Playing with Pictures, The Art of Victorian Photocollage was an exhibit, international exhibit that was put on. Anything about Anna Atkins and cyanotypes is pretty fascinating. And then this last book has been pretty much, I call it my Bible of alternative printing. It's been around forever, maybe since the 90s, I think. And it's a fantastic how-to book and inspiring book made by these three women. And so that is just my constant go-to. So I wanted to share those. So let's start with early photography. When we think of early photography, it was 1839 when it was announced. Can't really say that's when it was invented, excuse me, because there were so many things happening that led up to this moment. But, really, even though it was photography was invented to mimic reality and to depict a scene as realistically as possible with chemistry and a machine, the camera. Really, it was a very hands-on, process, and it was very experimental. So it resulted in a lot of really interesting, unique imagery. And very unpredictable because they were exploring this new medium. So this idea of experimentation was at the soul of the beginnings of photography. The other fun thing about the beginning was that so many people from so many different fields and disciplines were experimenting with the medium. So there were no rules yet, and there were no, set standards yet. So people, botanists and physicists and chemists, of course, and Victorian women, so many people were experimenting with the medium at the time. And the methods were experimental, and the endeavor was, at this point, not necessarily meant to be an artistic one. Close my door quickly. Apologies, a little loud out there. And so again, it was more to work the way through these techniques and to learn the methods, but they ended up in really interesting artistic images. So one of the guys we kind of can't not talk about is William Henry Fox Talbot, who was an English scientist. And he called his early work photogenic drawings, and then they became what he called calotypes. Photogenic drawings were sort of what we would think of as photograms now. But he was working with a lot of plant material, which we're going to talk about in this class. And he would place objects onto light-sensitive paper to get basically a contact print of it. Then he developed the calotype, which became, this was something he developed in the camera. So the paper was coated with light-sensitive chemicals and exposed in the camera. And this created a paper negative. So it was the first process where you could create multiple images from a quote-unquote negative, where the daguerreotype was a one-of-a-kind. You couldn't create duplicates yet. And it really made for some really beautiful imagery. So here's some of the early Talbot experiments. You can see this is 1835, so this is before he or Daguerre technically announced that they had invented photography. And this is what he calls a photogenic drawing. And I love that he uses the word drawing in here. It was also referred to sometimes as nature drawing. So it's not the human hand drawing it, but it was a drawing of by nature or by the chemical process. But I just really want you to look at the visual aspects of some of these early images and how really beautiful they are, even though they're primitive. And these are a lot of the techniques when I begin to talk about some of the ways that we can do alternative printing and these handmade photographs. These are a lot of the techniques that we tend to mimic or look for in our imperfect prints. Here was Talbot just sort of playing with light sensitive materials. This is, probably a photogenic drawing or like a photogram. So 3 sheets of gauze. And then here's a lot of his early calotypes were photogenic drawings. These were referred to as calotypes, but it's hard to know when you look at some of these old images which process he was really using. Were they in camera or were they photograms, basically? But you'll see these are very similar to some of the techniques we're going to be talking about in this class, like lumens. Here's some of the early daguerreotypes also from the first few years of photography. And again, some of these were obviously maybe considered failures, but they created these really beautiful, interesting, I call them specimens in a way. And here's one of William Draper's, one of his more successful early daguerreotypes. So this is only 1840, and photography was announced to be invented or discovered in 1839. But all these anomalies and all of these accidents and issues with the plates and the negatives and the papers and the prints are things that we look for today that give our handmade images that handmade look. So let's look at a few more people from early photography who were experimenting. Von Eddinghausen was an Austrian botanist, and he did a technique, what he called nature printing, which was very similar to the photogenic drawings of Talbot. And basically, he was taking dried and pressed plants, rolling them between a copper or lead plate, and then using that plate to print onto really fibrous paper with a sepia ink. And here's some of his specimens. And so, of course, you can imagine as a botanist, and we're going to talk about Anna Atkins and cyanotypes, this was really an excellent way to show the details of these materials and the plant life that they were studying. And they're also quite lovely. I love that these are with a sepia ink as well. So there, a lot of the beginnings of photography was also related to, what we refer to as printmaking now today. They were sort of intertwined in the techniques that people were using. August Strindberg was a Swedish playwright, and he created a beginning of photography what he called celestography. And so he was taking light sensitive photographic plates and placing them out underneath the night skies with the stars and the moon and the Milky Way. And he thought that what he was recording was the actual image of the night sky. Of course, we know now this is debris falling on the plate. This is, exposure from whatever light was around. This is not an image of the sky. However, because of his experimenting and because of his imagination of thinking that this is what he could do, he got these really wonderful plates that actually do mimic the night sky. It's the unpredictability of the handmade photograph that really intrigues me. There's another character in the late 1800s, Hippolyte Baraduc. He was a French physician. And again, remember I said there were so many people from so many different disciplines, quote unquote, playing with photography. And he invented what he called thought photography. And he believed he was recording human thoughts and energy through the plate. So he sometimes would use a camera, and other times he would actually put the photosensitive plate like to his wife's forehead, thinking he could record her thoughts. So the one on the left is, you can see there's a hand on the plate. And as we know, these are light sensitive and sometimes heat sensitive, as we know now. But he believed that he was recording people's auras or energetic fields that were radiating around them. But once again, the experiment and the imagination, even if that's not exactly what he was recording, is what creates these unique images. The one on the right is a farmer who he recorded shortly after. He was a pig farmer, and he recorded this shortly after the farmer had slaughtered several pigs. So he assumed that this chaotic energy swirling around him was from this act that he had just completed. And then, of course, throughout this class and throughout all my classes, I like to weave history with contemporary photographers. And anybody who knows me knows that Sugimoto is my all-time favorite living photographer. And what he did is he went to the Getty Museum in LA and got access to Talbot's original Cyanotypes, his original paper negatives. And he was able to get access to them and was able to use these negatives to produce large scale prints. And then he colored them with toning agents to replicate the hues of the original negatives. Because you can't take these negatives out into the world because they're in, dark areas, they're light sensitive, they would fade. So he got access to them, I would imagine, on the premises, and made these large scale photographs of, these are photographs of Talbot's original paper negatives. And like I said, he hand toned them to mimic what he saw when he was looking at the negatives. And I just think Sugimoto is really steeped in photographic history. And I just think this is such a wonderful project he did. And not anybody, I think, would be able to get into the Getty and be able to actually make prints out of Talbot's negatives. So thankful that Sugimoto did this. And they're large scale. I'll show you an image. Oh, I thought I put it in there. I thought I put an image of the installation, but they're about 45 by 45 inches. So they're pretty big. And something that even obviously Talbot at the time could never print that large because they were contact prints. So they were generally no bigger than an 8x10. So to kind of sum up this early photography, although photography was invented to realistically depict a scene and was made with a mechanical device, the camera, it was ultimately and constantly a handmade process resulting in unique one-of-a-kind images in the beginning. So just to kind of keep that in mind, I really like to think about all these techniques we're going to talk about in this class are heavily linked to the early history of photography. So we're going to jump to the late 1800s with Victorian photocollage. And some of you might know this this part of photo history. And if you don't, it's just so playful and enjoyable. And I can't get enough of these images. And there's some facts about this what would I call it? I would almost call it an era in photography. And they were almost all made by aristocratic upper class women who had the time to sit in their parlors and make these photo collages. They would often cut up the carte de visites, which were those sort of cardboard looking, they were calling cards, and they were cardboard looking 4x5-ish images that you would leave. You would visit people at their homes and you would leave a portrait of yourself with your name on it, very much like our modern day business cards, but they weren't meant for business. They were visiting cards. So this is what they were often cutting up to make these photo collages. So you'll see they're very portrait based. At the time, these women were not considering themselves artists. They were not thinking they were making art. They were made to highlight their lifestyles and circles of acquaintances. And the way you would see these images is you would visit someone in their parlor and you would look at the book that they made of the photo collages. Of course, now, these are accepted as really refined use of color composition and sometimes concept, and they're considered objects of art now. So there was an exhibit organized by the Art Institute of Chicago. It was at the Met in 2010. It was called Playing with Pictures, The Art of Victorian Photo Collage. And I have it right behind me. There was a book of this show. If you can get your hands on it from your library, it's a wonderful, beautiful book. And a quote from the book is, "The compositions they made with photographs and watercolors are whimsical and fantastical." So I'm going to show you a lot of these because there's not a lot to say about them. I just want you to look at them and enjoy them. But I did kind of group them into the categories of what they were making these collages of. And you'll see some names, some famous names, Alexandra, Princess of Wales, who must have trained in art. Because if you look at her photo collages, anything that's not photographic there is either hand-drawn, hand-painted, color pencil. And she clearly had quite a skill for this. But one of the main subjects you would see in their photo collage was their drawing room, their salons, because that's where they spent their time, and the people visiting them in their drawing rooms. Lady Filmer is one of the main characters in this medium. I just love their play with color and perspective, and they're just fascinating. Some more of the parlor images. You can see the women on the left chose to work in more of a grayscale pencil looking sketch. The hobbies and their pastimes were another subject of their photo collages, whether that's playing cards, boating, archery. These are probably the beginning of what we refer to as mixed media now, combining traditional art materials with photographs. And these women were doing them in a really refined and beautiful way. I love this one. I just wonder, it's archery, maybe one of her hobbies, but I'm fascinated by who her arch nemesis is in the center. And a lot of these had their dark side, or they had their dark humor. They were witty. And so they're just really whimsical and really, really, I think, fun to explore. So, letter writing and drawing. They would incorporate the imagery in that. So these are here, the stamps are the actual photographs, and the degree of creativity in these. So this would be now we're going to see some examples in them referencing what we would call fine art, or referencing other art forms, like here, sculptures or bust on a pedestal. I love this one with this sort of photo in place of drawing or sketch behind it. One of the more realistic renditions. They also would show another one of their subjects was their items, their pieces that they owned, items that they owned. So things like fans or jewelry. This one's just so interesting to me. I'm assuming this is a three-dimensional object, an actual fan, perhaps. Watches and jewelry. It's hard to know if these were three-dimensional objects or they're just drawings in a book of the items. The one on the left, my left, is just fascinating. I mean, I can't help but think that Monty Python's Flying Circus must have gotten some inspiration from these because, and again, check out the little bit of humor, right? And then some of them were just pure visual composition, patterns and designs. A lot of them were featuring children and fantastical scenes for their children. Very, Alice in Wonderland. And a lot of animal life, of course. Darwin's theories were recently published. And so a lot of plant life, animal life in reference to that. And then again, I just kind of put this one at the end for just the silly humor and whimsy of it and reminding me of Monty Python. So ways that you can mimic this is I think pretty clear. Cut up photographs of your own, print your photographs, cut them up. Cut up photographs from magazines, maps, letters. And, when I have my in-person hands-on handmade photo workshop here in Missoula, I encourage my participants to bring letters, magazines, bring physical objects, not just their hard drive. Of course, they bring their hard drives and they bring their cameras. And of course, I have scanners and printers and we use all that. But I also encourage them to bring physical items so that we can begin to play with collage. And bring out the art materials. Be in kindergarten again. Bring your glue and your pencil and your markers and your scissors and just play with mixed media. I also wanted to go to a little more contemporary. I mean, this is the Dadaists in the 1920s, but to show you more contemporary versions of other people and mediums or other movements, I should say, that were using this photo collage. And this is Hannah Hoke and the Dadaists. Robert Rauschenberg, who was a painter, but worked a lot with photography, photographs, and this sort of mixed media photo collage. Betty Hahn is a current working photographer who takes a lot of old photographs and sews. So that rainbow is sewn, the edge of this artichoke is sewn, the bit of the building is sewn. So it's pencil and fabric and some sort of stitching, which can be really fun to explore. This is also Betty Hahn, just to show you another example of a more contemporary sort of approach to photo collage, where she's taking actual objects. Also Betty Hahn. And she'll work with similar imagery and keep working them in different methods or different materials. So she's taken this same image of the Lone Ranger and done them in different processes. So the one on the left is a cyanotype with paint and actual applied silver stars. The other one's a Van Dyke brown that's been colored with chalk, lithograph with watercolor, and a Van Dyke brown that looks like, I think when she coated the paper, she only coated certain spots. And we'll talk more about cyanotypes in this class. And then Bea Nettles is another working contemporary photographer who's been working with this sort of medium. She works a lot with cyanotypes, and I thought I'd include her because we are going to talk about cyanotypes, but with this imagery and pencil or paint or any other traditional material. And she uses a lot of photographs from her family history. So this is cyanotype Van Dyke and hand applied color. So there, I mean, photo collage is the sky's the limit as far as ways that you can explore this medium. And there are no rules. Okay, let's dive into the next section, cyanotypes, lumens, and chemigrams. And when I teach my in-person class, it's only a 3-day class. So what I've been doing in the last few years is one of them I do a lot of image transfers and printing on alternative surfaces. And then the other one that I do, I focus on all of these more UV processes, cyanotypes, lumens, chemigrams, because it's just a completely different working system. So here's just visual examples of each. And a little history of cyanotypes. They were invented by astronomer and chemist Sir John Herschel in 1842. Cyanotype comes from the Greek word cyan, meaning dark blue impression. And a dear friend of his was Dr. John Children, and John Children's daughter was Anna Atkins. So Anna Atkins learned the cyanotype process from John Herschel. She was a trained botanist, and so she used cyanotypes to record the plant life she was studying, and she's known to have created the first series of photographic books. So books made from photographs, in her case, made from actual cyanotypes. So here's an example of John Herschel, some of his original attempts at cyanotypes. And then let's take a look at Anna Atkins. So she published several books, and they were all, here's one of British algae, and they were all actual, physical cyanotypes of materials she was studying, compiled into a book. So she's considered to be the first photographic book maker. And again, she's doing this to explore the nuances and I would imagine the physical aspects of these plants. But I mean, look at the beautiful displays, like in this foreign ferns page, right? And the way she's sometimes arranges these specimens are quite lovely. So you can do cyanotypes at home, and there's a long way and there's a short way. And the long way requires you actually buying a cyanotype kit, which involves the chemicals. Sometimes it's the crystals and dried up chemicals that you mix, which these kits last longer. You only mix up enough to use, and they'll last forever. And there's also liquid kits where you just literally mix A and B, and those you have to mix every time, and they don't keep as well. But they'd probably be best for your first try. So basically you buy the kit, you mix the solutions, you coat the papers in a light safe environment because the cyanotype chemical itself is light sensitive. So you can have a safe life in a room. You could do it safe light. You could do it in a closet or a bathroom as long as it's light tight. And you coat the papers. Some people coat them with a coating glass rod. You can brush them on, and that creates the sort of brushed on edges that we'll see. So it's really up to you what visual you want for the way you coat the papers. You let them dry in the dark. Then when you're ready to make your cyanotype, you quickly take them out, arrange your composition, expose it, and then wash it and dry it. And I'll show you examples of what we were doing in class. So Photographers Formulary is a company that I like to support because they're right here in Montana, on the northern part of the state, and they've been around forever. But there are other companies that these are sort of liquid versions of mixing up a cyanotype solution. So I'm showing you some examples from the workshop. So these are tests that I had done on the bottom with cyanotypes and on the top with Van Dyke Brown, which is a similar process, just a different chemical makeup and different outcome. And you can see I'm marking each of these based on the watercolor paper I'm using and if it's been in the sun or the UV. So it is good to, be methodical and make notes so that you can replicate something if you like what you got. So this is us in a workshop, and what we're doing is we're choosing what negatives we're going to use. Of course, you can use negatives or you can use actual physical objects like Anna Atkins did, but we're laying this out ahead of time so that when we get the paper out, we can get all these negatives on there, get it in the UV box and expose it without messing around too much. So you kind of want to map out your composition and your plan ahead of time, because once that cyanotype paper hits the light, it's becoming exposed. So now we were using a UV box here. UV box is nice because it's predictable. It's going to be the same type of light, the same temperature, the same time, where when you go out in the sun, it depends on the weather, it depends on the time of year. But that can be fun to explore that way. So here's us doing cyanotypes in the sun. And then here's us washing the Van Dyks and the cyanotypes. Usually give them a quick wash in water and then a better archival wash later. And here's us drying some of the cyanotypes and Van Dyke browns. And just here's some examples on the right. You can see Van Dyke brown cyanotype. And then some of them are negative, some of them are objects. But then on the left, this is a piece of paper that I coated with Van Dyke brown and cyanotype. So in the light, the dark or in the safe light room, I just kind of brushed on both chemicals and sort of let them mix and mash, see what happened. You could be a lot more meticulous with the way you mix those chemicals. If you're not interested in doing all of that, you can do it the short way. And you buy a pre-coated paper, you get it out of the bag, arrange your composition, expose it, wash it, dry it. And the company that I know that makes these that are really easy to use are called Sunprints. So you can get the Sunprints that are just the paper itself, or you can get the kit, which comes with a little piece of plexi, to sandwich your print. But these are really great and easy. I mean, kids can use them. There's no chemicals. You're limited by how big you can go, and you don't get that beautiful brushed edge because you can see they come pre-coated. But it's a really easy, fun way to get cyanotypes quickly and easily. And they do have this very consistent blue that is the Sunprint blue, where if you mix your own chemicals, you can play around with that more. But this is a great way to just have fun with cyanotypes. So these are Sunprints, just playing around with different Sunprints. The one on the right, I just had a bunch of little origami butterflies, and I just kind of placed them on the paper, which is why they look a little ghostly. If you don't use glass, then things can start to show their shadows and look three-dimensional. You can move things during the process, and then you get that movement ghostly look. I wanted to show some contemporary artists who work with these methods in maybe a more intentional way. Marco Brewer is known for a lot of his cameraless images. So he works with all sorts of cameraless photography. But I really loved this one where it looks like, it's not about the image that he created on the cyanotype. It's about what he created from just pieces of exposed cyanotype paper and then created this collage. And I think it's really beautiful. Clarissa Sly is a pretty well-known contemporary photographer who's from Virginia, and she works with a lot of different methods, but a lot with historical family photos, text that she's written, and cyanotypes. So as we go on in the class, I'm going to keep sort of mixing. This reminds me of the Victoria photo collage, but yet you're using cyanotypes as well. Right? So really the sky's the limit of how you create these and how you want to combine all the different methods. So you can see the one on my right, she's now drawing and coloring on the cyanotype as well. Here's another contemporary photographer who I think is really cool. I love that she works with cyanotypes. I think she might work with chemigrams too, I'm not sure, but she's stitching as well. So those lines emanating out are thread that she's stitching through the cyanotype. And I just think these are really, really beautiful. Brenda Stewart's a photographer I found. So you can see she's using cyanotypes and then cutting those out to then make a cutout collage from the cyanotype paper. Okay, Lumens. Lumens, really easy, fun process. This is what they look like, just to give you a visual. If you have any wasted old darkroom paper, don't ditch it. If you don't want it, send it to me. But don't throw it away. There's all sorts of ways that you can use old, supposedly exposed paper with lumens and chemigrams. So a little bit of history, although they weren't called lumens, really what William Henry Fox Talbot was doing with photogenic drawings were essentially what we're doing with lumens today. It's just that now we have, actual photosensitive paper that we can use, where he was experimenting with that. So from Talbot, this quote, "How charming it would be if it were possible to cause these natural images to imprint themselves durably and remain fixed upon the paper." So again, just to show you some of his original photogenic drawings, but I also wanted to show you these next to the lumens we're going to look at because they're very similar in their visual approach. And you can use other things than plant life with lumens, but when I really think of lumens as using plant life, and I'll explain why here. So some supplies you need, light sensitive paper, a couple darkroom trays, water and fixer, you can choose to fix or not, any kind of plant material, glass or plexiglass, and cardboard to put your stuff on. Scanner or a camera, I say that because with these and chemigrams, if they're not stored properly, they can begin to change and fade over time. So I would always encourage my students to make a nice photograph of the lumen or scan it at the stage that you like it so that you have a file of that. And basically, this is the process. You take out a sheet of photographic paper, you arrange the plant material on top, you cover it with glass, you put it in the sun for an hour or more, depending on the heat and the light and the time of year and day. You then remove the plant material, lightly wash the print, and you can choose to fix it or not. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why you choose to fix it or not. So this is us doing this in the workshop. We're just gathering lots of plant material. This is us laying them out on the paper. So you can see the one on the right looks like I probably photographed it through glass because everything's smushed. Where the one on the left, I think we just let the plant sit on the paper and not smush it. Now, I will say I have found that you can see the one on the right that it almost looks like it's beginning to sweat. If you can see all those dots there, you can see this sort of material oozing out of what looks like the rosemary on the bottom. The more the plants ooze underneath the glass and the heat, the more you get these really interesting outlines and shadows. And so I think you get the coolest result when you get plants that ooze a lot and you put them under glass and you put them in hot, hot sun. So that's my experience, but you get lots of different, results from a lot of different ways of working. So these were some of the lumens that we got in my workshop, some of my participants, and I apologize I don't have everybody's names here. Sorry, former participants, but I didn't have names on all the files, so I didn't want to credit some people and not others. So these are some of my awesome students and the work they did in my workshop. And you can see, depending on what photographic paper you're using, which brand, how old it is. I mean, we were using paper I found at a consignment shop from the 1950s that had been, they were in paper bags. It was torn open. To a regular photographer, it would seem like trash, like these are unusable. But that's what we were using. So it depended on the brand, the paper, how old it is, the plant material. Get a lot of different results based on, again, the brand. Some turned more purple, some turned more yellow and brown. And then that's where to fix or not fix comes in. If you really like the image that you have when the lumen's done, you probably don't want to fix it, because when you fix it, it completely shifts the color of the lumen. So that's where I would encourage my students to make a scan or take a picture. Because if you don't fix it, you pretty much got to keep it in real low light. It can't be exposed to light or it's going to begin to change. This one turned out really amazing with how the plant got this sort of coral orange, and then you have this, purpley blue background. And again, it's unpredictable, which is so great about the process. So the variables in lumens, as I said, are the paper, the plant material, the intensity of the heat and light, and if you fix or don't fix. Okay, I'm just checking my time. Chemigrams. So chemigrams are very similar in the respect that you can use old exposed photographic paper, but it's a completely different process. So it was discovered, we think, by Pierre Cordier in 1956. And it uses resists on photographic paper with chemicals. And I'll explain what that means, but let's just take a look at some of the imagery. Most of the chemigrams that I have done and have seen are grayscale. So versions of black and white, they can have color, of course, but I've only also used black and white paper. but you'll see as I show you the method why this is. But they kind of live in this grayscale brown tone world. And so these are from the 50s, and I think they're just really interesting. He was, of course, learning how to manipulate the process, so he was getting some predictable results. So your supplies, you need darkroom trays, developer, stop bath, fixer, water. So this process is the most involved as far as being able to have a full set of darkroom chemicals. Light sensitive paper, it can be spent and expired, of course. And then the resist material, this is the fun part, is any sticky material that will adhere to paper. Anything. We use toothpaste, glue, hairspray, molasses, honey, egg, butter, anything you can think of that, think of like the more viscous and sticky it is, the more it'll adhere to that paper while it's floating in these chemicals. And then you can scratch the paper or bend the paper or fold the paper. So here's the basic layout. Developer, water, fixer, stop bath. Okay, but let me show you a little more of a detail, but these are essential. You need these chemicals. This is what my setup looks like. So developer, water, fixer, because that's you're going to be continuously moving among these three trays, developer, water, fixer, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And when you get what you like, then you move over to the water, stop, fixer, wash. Okay, so you keep playing in this situation here. And then when you have what you like, then you move over to the final steps. This is a really abstract way of working. This is not with negatives. It's not with objects. I mean, you can certainly use objects, but you'll see it's a very abstract result. It's really fun. So the basic process is you pull out a sheet of paper. You can work in full light as well. It's just that the paper is going to begin to expose as you're doing all this to it, which is fine. I've done it in sun as well. You coat, paint, spray, draw with this stuff on it. You can scratch it, do all sorts of things to it. And then you either put it in the developer or the fixer first. I'll show you the difference. And you begin to move it between developer and fixer, usually with a water bath in between. So it's just going to keep your chemicals a little better, but you're dipping this paper with toothpaste and honey in these chemicals. So you can see it's you're gonna have to refresh your chemicals. But generally between the developer and fixer, you have a water bath that you move between the two. And then, as I said, when you like where it is, you can stop, fix, and do an archival wash. Now, unlike regular darkroom printing, where you always start in the developer, you can start in either in this one, and it gives you a very different visual result. And I'll show you. So if you go in the developer first, you're going to get a black background with white outlines. If you go in the fixer first, you're going to get a white background with black outlines. Okay. And just like I said with Lumens, the variables are the paper, the ambient light you're working in, the developer and fixer. That's which chemicals you've chosen, how strong they are, what ratios, and then whatever resist materials you're using. So this is what I was saying. If you put the print in the developer first, it becomes black in the background with white outlines, and that's sort of going to be the baseline for the rest of the print. It'll morph and change, but that's sort of where it starts and where it will end. And the fixer first is the inverse of that. So here's just some examples. Some of these are artists that I found online, but I wanted you to see the broad variety of what these can look like. So this is a woman, Megan Kennedy, and she used hand lotion, canola oil, and scratched the surface. This is an artist I found called Bridget Kahn. And I love what she's doing with them. She's then creating collages out of the chemigrams themselves and sort of sewing and threading them together into these, larger collages, which I think is just really beautiful. But you can see all these chemigrams have that similar color palette. It's the black, brown, white, and then you get this pinkish, yellowish, beigeish colors that come out based on the paper, how old it is, the kind, all of those things. I found this artist, Chuck Kelton. I'm not sure where he's based out of, but what he's doing with these, I think, is phenomenal. He's obviously got a bit of a control over his process. And he's also using photogram at the same time. So those circles on there are obviously some sort of circular object he's setting on there to get that really solid. I don't know if he's putting a sticker on there or, something that's going to stay. And then he's tinting them with a gold toner. So I don't know what the scale of these are, but I just discovered him when researching this class and just think these are amazing. So he's almost, he's creating landscapes with photograms, chemigrams, and then gold toner. And I've never really seen anything like these, but I'm showing you this as an example of that it seems to me, based on his work, that you can sort of begin to master the chemigram process the more you work with it to know what results you're going to get. In reality, for most of us, the chemigram process is just about pure experimentation and just, really letting go of expectations and what it's going to look like. It's just fun. So ways that you can play with these techniques, of course, get yourself some sun prints from Amazon or your local art store and begin playing with cyanotypes. You don't need any chemicals. You don't need any darkroom. You just need sun, paper, and water. If you wanted to get a little more in depth, you can experiment with Lumens, where you need paper, plant material, sun, and water, but you don't need any of the chemicals. And then Chemigrams, if you want to begin to play with darkroom chemicals, you can, grab household items from around your home. You just need darkroom paper and then, of course, the chemicals. Okay, and last but not least, one of my favorite methods of working in my own work is what we call broadly alternative printing and alternative surfaces. And this is what the workshops I've been teaching for years are based on. And I did a lot of this when I was in graduate school many, many years ago. And so I learned a lot through mistakes and trial and error. And what I love about this workshop is it's hands-on. So we're all there together working, but I can also, I not only demo the techniques, but I can also share my many, many years of using these techniques and messing up in these techniques to say, oh, do you see, let me tell you why that happened. Let me tell you why that didn't work. Or, oh no, I don't think you want to use this process on that material. It's probably not going to work, or let's try it, okay? But when you're doing this at home, all this alternative printing, it's fun, it's experimental. It can be frustrating because things happen and you might not always know why, but I'm not saying that to discourage you from doing it at home. So you can see all the different materials here. We have metal, canvas, wood, watercolor paper, tissue paper, anything that you can imagine you can get an image on. So what I consider within this realm is printing directly on alternative surfaces. So preparing surfaces so you can get them through a printer. If there's something you can't get through a printer, like a brick, a wood block, a piece of glass, then you do image transfers to the substrate that you can't get through a printer. Excuse me. We also create our own custom surfaces for printing from scratch by embedding flowers in there, or we basically build up a surface to print on. And then overprinting and underprinting is a term that's used basically mixed media. So just using inkjet printing with traditional art materials. So this is my workshop this year. I'll do one every year. It's almost always in Missoula. I did travel with it for a while before COVID. I haven't resumed that. I have to basically, get a U-Haul truck to bring all the supplies. But we'll see. I might consider doing that again. But that's the info. And you can find the info on my website. So here's some examples of things that we've done during the workshop, or some of these are images I found online. So printing on tinfoil, getting tinfoil through your printer. And unfortunately, I'm not trying to withhold information here, but this is such a huge, I used to teach a week-long hands-on in-person class and can barely teach you everything I know. So I just want to expose you to this world and give you examples. But I can't even begin today to teach you all the ways that you can do this. But I just want to show you some of the possibilities. So this is an iridescent paper that we coated with iridescent substance and then put through the printer. This is one of my students. Again, just visuals of all the different materials that we're printing on: rice paper, cardboard, everything you can imagine. So there's sort of an aerial view of everybody's prints out drying. It's probably at the end of the week. And then a lot of the traditional gel medium, we use a lot of gel medium and glues and paints and pencils, all sorts of things. So it's basically, you know, we have our wet area and then our dry area, you can see with all the computers and printers. So we're often definitely using the inkjet printers. So just more examples of all the possibilities. You can see there's some cyanotypes in there. It looks like we were doing some sun prints as well. So here's some examples of image transfers. So we have, and this is, you can transfer onto substrates that can go through a printer, or you can choose to just transfer to it and not put it through the printer, or you can transfer onto substrates that won't go through a printer. So here, watercolor paper would, but this person chose to do a transfer, and you got all that jagged edge and that sort of messed up edge from it, which you would never get unless you tried to do that in Photoshop, you know, from a print. So this is on watercolor paper. This is one of mine. It's on watercolor, and I scratched the ink off and then scratched the surface and then drew the sort of diving figure over the top. This is a wet transfer on canvas. This is from the Digital Art Studio book. They have a lot of really interesting examples in there. This is an image I did of my grandmother. It's a transfer on wood. And I coated it with some turpentine or some sort of material that made it crackle like that. One of my students, this is Barbie Steps, if I remember correctly, image transfer on wood. And again, look at all these beautiful edges and the inconsistencies, the bubbling. You know, you can mimic that in Photoshop till the cows come home, but to actually have a physical object that does this, and you can manipulate it to try to do that, but more often than not, things happen. And that's what I always have to tell my students in the workshop, like, let it be. You know, it's not perfection. If you want perfection, just make an inkjet print. This is an image transfer on glass, and I sprayed it again. I take notes, I don't remember right now. I sprayed it with something that made it, again, crackle, and then I folded it over on itself, and you can see I kind of, you know, did some abrasion there near the female figure. This is a student of mine. This is image transfer on glass. Clay tile, like a little terracotta tile. I go to our little reclamation place here and pick up dirt cheap materials. I mean, we print on anything in that workshop. This is another image transfer on clay tile. I believe this is Elizabeth Stone's, my friend and colleague. So that's a white tile she used. This, I believe, is also Barbie Steps for my workshop. That's on a gray tile. This is an image of me and my dog on a piece of aluminum. And here's just different examples. We have canvas paper, wood, watercolor, rice paper. And then there's overprinting and underprinting, and that's basically when you're just combining inkjet print with traditional art materials. And there's rules. There's ways to do that make it work. Like, you've ever tried to take an inkjet print out of a box of paper, you know, a packaged piece of paper, print on it, and then do watercolor. Well, that's not going to work because it's not going to react with the water. So there are methodologies to what order you go in and how you prepare things to take traditional art materials and the inkjet print. And there's, you know, if you can't make it to Missoula, Montana, please, there's a million resources out there, and probably people where you live who are doing these. And again, that Digital Art Studio is a great place to start. But you can see these are just some of the materials we're using. In the center there are some colored waxes. So we do wax as well. And I'll be finishing up here in a little bit, but these are some examples from that Digital Art Studio of pieces that they have done. And I wanted to show you because they have some really wonderful pictures of overprinting and underprinting. So this is paint and rice paper layered between a transferred image and an inkjet print. So it's a piece of rice paper. They printed on the piece of rice paper. You have to prepare it before you print it. And then it looks like they, at some point, I don't know the order, but did some watercolor paint, looks like, and then transferred an image, you know, perhaps on top of that. It's 30 by 22. This is paint and inkjet on a piece of cotton. So I'm imagining the inkjet print is the trees and then the color is the paint. This is a clear emulsion, so you can do these things called acrylic lifts that are really cool. So you basically get this, I'll show you a picture of it in a second. You get this clear piece of emulsion with the image embedded. And then there's pencil and acrylic. So here's just some of my participants, we're preparing paper here to go through the printer or to do a transfer. So it's really hands-on. And again, even if you do this at home, you need a working space and you need to be open to the possibilities and mistakes that can happen. Yeah, there's rules and ways and methodologies that will give you more success, but the reality is that you just want to experiment. And that's how I learned to do a lot of this. So here we're pouring gel medium. We use a lot of gel medium because it can work as a lift. So this is the lift I was talking about. This is a piece of acrylic that we sort of printed on and then peeled off the paper. And you can see I embedded some plants and things in there. So it really incorporates all, I put this section last because you can use all these other different ways of making handmade prints with alternative printing, once you learn some of the basics. So she's cleaning her piece of aluminum there. Here, my friend Sherry's sort of contemplating, she's got a transfer or a print there, and we're kind of trying to figure out what she wants to do on top of it. Here's one of my students hanging out her custom papers to dry. Okay, so again, the different ways that I teach or that you can work within this is getting things through your printer like tinfoil or rice paper, as long as you know how to prepare them and printing on those. If you have things you can't print onto, making a transfer, creating your own custom surfaces, and then over and under printing, so using traditional art materials. So really, I hope, again, I mean, these B&H classes are fast and furious. I just gave you so many different ways to make handmade prints, and I don't expect you to be able to grasp all of that at this moment. And I certainly hope you don't feel overwhelmed by it. But what I do want to convey here is that there's this huge world out there. And, this is the tip of the iceberg as far as some ideas of what I showed you, of ways that you can work with your photographs or with objects and without your camera, perhaps, and without the computer, perhaps, that are a whole other way of exploring the creative possibilities of making a unique handmade photograph and having a ton of fun in the process, I hope. Yeah, that's what I have for you, Derek.
Arlene, thank you. You packed a lot of information
No, I always
into
do.
an hour. No, that's great. It's like a nice introduction, but at the same time, it's like it gets you wanting more and getting you interested in it. I gotta ask, what's the easiest, best gateway into alternative processes? Is there one that stands above as like if you want to get involved and you don't want to just jump straight into the deep end, what's the easiest route?
Well, as far as, I mean, with the UV stuff, certainly the sun print kits, you could order that off of Amazon, have it at your house and be making cyanotypes in no time. Like kids can use those. So that's super easy way to just get into that. If you're not opposed to some chemicals, the lumens and the chemigrams, the lumens especially, you don't even need the chemicals, are really easy. Really, I mean, it's just plants on paper and sun and water. But if you wanted to get into more of the other stuff I'm talking about with alternative printing, I would say starting with something like image transfers. There's so much information out there on image transfers, and that can mean a lot of different things. But there's some out of the box products you can buy that, you get it out of the box, you run it through your printer, and then you can transfer it onto something, right? So if you just even look up image transfers, lots of resources, lots of ways you can do that are not hugely difficult.
Awesome. When I saw you pull out that tinfoil print, I'm like, man, I didn't do enough when I had my printer. Before I got rid of it, I'm like, I'm that boring person that's like, you shouldn't just printing on photo paper. And I'm like, man, so many missed opportunities.
Well, and I
Especially when
will, there is a caveat, Derek. Let me say before everybody starts doing this and like ruins their printer and
yeah.
kills warranty on their is that there's materials and things you have to use to prepare these things to go through your printer. If you just stick a piece of tinfoil through your printer, it's going to jam. There's no question. But so there are products. One of them is called Ink-Aid, which is one of my favorite products to use. And also you want to have a printer that you sort of designate to this. And a couple quick things here is a couple things you want to look for in these printers is you want a print head that can lift, right? Those some of the more like usually the 13-inch and wider, more professional printers like Epson, for instance, you can raise the print head, and you want printers that you can rear feed or front feed, basically meaning you have a straight print path, not up through the top and curling through. So you don't want to do this with your regular desktop printer because you don't want to do that curl. And then also you don't want the pizza, what we call the pizza wheels that track the paper. You don't want that to get into that substrate. So don't do this at home on your regular printer. But that doesn't mean if you have an old, I have a bunch of old, like, 9900s from Canon, or have 3800s from Epson that are old printers I've had forever. And I still use those for all my alternative printing. So yeah, if you have an old printer, hold on to it. And yeah, there's things that you can do to make it work.
I know. I had an old floor model Epson, and it was like, it would have been the perfect. It's like, yeah, I barely use it anymore. It would have been the perfect alternative process
I
machine.
know.
Now I
Yeah.
know. What are you gonna do? Question coming in from the audience: how do you dispose of your chemistry?
Mm, good question. I mean, in reality, like we have a hazmat collection day here in Missoula. So really, the really nasty chemicals, you should find a proper way to expose. You don't want to just pour those down the drain. But things like fixer, you can keep and reuse. Developer usually gets wasted, but yeah, you do want to keep those and dispose of them properly, not dump them down your drain. Just the developer and the fixer and the stop bath is probably too, from what I remember. But
Oh,
everything else that we've talked about is water soluble.
oh,
All that
awesome.
alternative stuff that I showed is all water soluble stuff that we just wash and put down the drain.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually shocked at how much isn't, this super involved, super dangerous. Like there was a lot of stuff that you went over that I'm like, oh yeah, because I was thinking, I'm glad you said for safe for kids, because I was thinking, oh, stuff I could do with my son and get him introduced into that kind of world.
I'd say of everything I showed you today, the chemigrams are the only ones that use, those traditional darkroom chemicals that you have to dispose of properly. Everything else is completely safe, chemical free. Yep.
Awesome. We always have fun when you're on, Eileen. You always take us in a different direction. That's such a nice break from just the normal monotony of what photography and education has become now. It's become kind
Yeah,
of
my
kind of
pleasure.
stale. Yeah,
Yeah,
you take us
Ken,
back.
there's lots of options out there. You just got to be open to them and be able to explore them. Yeah.
Definitely. And this was one of those events too where it's like, yeah, I'm like, wow, you really can think outside the box, and you don't have to know. But it takes someone, you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know in which direction to go with your creativity, but this kind of plants the seed, and now it's okay, well now I can look up this, and there's a lot of great resources out there. I know you did remind us again where we can find out what you have going on, either in person, online, anything like that.
Well, sure. My website, eileenrafferty.com. Yep.
Awesome.
That's where I list all my workshops. I only do 1 or 2 a year at this point. And, people always ask, well, would you do your handmade photo class as an online class? And I really don't want to. It's handmade.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, I love us being in the room and getting messy and figuring out why that didn't work, or having, revelations of something new and getting messy and cleaning up at the end of the day. So, again, it's something I do here in Missoula, and I have taken it on the road. Maybe I will again sometime. Um, but yeah, but again, if you can't make it to me, there's plenty of people who do these, and there's so many ways you can learn online. Again, if you just, these techniques that I taught you today or shared with you today, you can Google them and you're going to find people doing them, and you're going to find lots of tutorials. But it really is about knowing the basics, and then just, forget the tutorials and just play, just
Yeah.
play around and
Yeah, I think that's the important thing.
Yep.
Figure it out, and I think that's the important thing about the whole tactile part of the experience is you have to have your hands on things to realize why it's not working. It's not just about following steps. It's really about understanding the reactions and what is making everything go forward.
Exactly. And embracing the mistakes and
Yeah.
embracing the accidents and learning, and sometimes the accidents are the, you know, the most fun part of the process.
Yeah,
You got to put your
definitely.
type A personality aside for this, everyone. Trust me, I know.
I know when you said if you're expecting or you want a perfect print, it's like no, this is where you have to kind of put that perfectionist aside and say, I'm going to break the rules or I'm gonna be happy with. I mean, I think you almost have to go into it looking for a result that's completely opposite of what you're used to getting.
Absolutely. Yeah, you just like you got to let the kid part of you out and just play and experiment and have fun and you will get results that you like. And if you take notes along the way and you do get results that you like, you can you can make these, I hate to use the word predictable, but you can repeat your steps and get results that you like if you are taking notes and you are paying attention. Uh, so it's not just willy-nilly. I've been doing it long enough. I know what this thing's going to look like on this material. I know what's going to work, which transfer is going to work, all that. So you can get there certainly. And even if you're only playing with one of these, the longer you play with it, the more you're going to start to understand what's happening. So in the beginning, it's a lot of experimentation and fun, but you can begin to get results consistently if you pay attention, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Eileen, it's always great to have you on. I know our viewers appreciate it. And to those of you out there, pull that tinfoil, that saran wrap, whatever bed sheets you're trying to jam in your printer right now, take it out. But definitely put on the creative side of your thinking. And Eileen, you're always great for kind of ushering us into these new landscapes for a lot of us who just stick to traditional processes most of the time. So a huge thank you to you for joining us with your expertise as always. To all of our viewers out there, thank you as always for tuning in. It's an early end to the day today. That's all we have for you here at the B&H Event Space. Another episode in the books. We'll catch you next time.